The 12th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.
Consider This, a program of issues and information behind today's news.
Getting from point A to point B sounds simple enough, yet in Nebraska, it's downright impossible for some, and not for the reasons you may think. Hi everyone, I'm Kathy Wyatt. Welcome to this week's edition of Consider This. Our topic, transportation. Joining us to talk more about it are Mark Intermill, who is chair for the Nebraska Public Transportation Coalition, Barb Valinsky, Director of Resource Investment and Partner Relations for United Way of the Midlands, and Lee Myers, Mobility Manager for the Metropolitan Area Planning Agency in Omaha. Thank you all so much for joining us. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Mark, we are going to start with you. If someone were just to say, tell us about transportation in Nebraska, how would you respond?
Well, I'd say for a lot of people, transportation works pretty well. If you own a car, if you have a driver's license, if you can afford to run that car, the transportation system works. But for people who don't either own a car, don't have a driver's license, or can't afford to operate a car, it can be really frustrating. There's a real challenge in arranging public transportation in Nebraska. We have a lot of different systems throughout the state, but one of the things that we found is we need to figure out how to coordinate those programs a little bit better so that we can help people get from where they are to where they need to get to.
Okay, and Barb, it was exactly those challenges that Mark just described that brought, about 40 of you together from across the state for a special conference that you are just out of. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, we had the 40 people were representing the entire state, and of course our state has a lot of rural areas. And of course we are the major urban area, so we have some different kinds of issues. Our Omaha area was really looking at those urban issues, especially as they relate to elderly, handicap, and people trying to get to and from work. We think those are some of the real gaps in transportation.
Now do me a favor, Barb, and just kind of paint a picture of this event for us. In other words, we don't need you to walk through specifics on the agenda, but let us know a little bit about what exactly was covered.
Well, a number of things were uncovered, including what some areas are now doing in transportation that maybe we can model after. We also talked about insurance. We talked about the Public Service Commission and their role. We talked about some possibility of public policy issues that we may need to address. And the most important part of the conference was that each of the groups got together and began that planning process for what are we going to do about it.
Okay. And Lee, Barb, and Mark have kind of been around this block a few different times. You are, I understand, brand new to your position. The day of this conference was actually your first day on the job as something we call a mobility manager. Tell us about that as far as what you know so far.
Well, terminology is important, but mobility manager comes out of federal legislation, and so I don't know that they're poets, that they know what alliteration is, but it's more coordination. It's really, there's buses, there's vans, there's cars, there's volunteers, and it really needs to be coordinated. So it's really more about coordination. That terminology is specific to some legislation, but that doesn't really tell what we're trying to do.
Okay, and coordination, thank you, is a key word in all of this. This is really what it was about. And Mark, you know, I guess there are those of us who it's easy for us to complain about something because we don't know the inner workings of things. But boy, there's a lot going on when you talk about coordination not only within one area, but across the entire board. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing from a big picture perspective and then narrow the scope a little bit if you would.
Well, from a statewide perspective, we probably have 60 or 70 different funded public transportation systems in the state. Some of them are very small. They may not serve very many people at all. But there are also some restrictions on some of those systems, that they may be operated by a county. and the county commissioners may not want them to go outside of the boundaries of their county. Yet the needs of the people in those counties oftentimes require that they do that. So what we tried to do with this, the workshop in Kearney, was to identify some regions, and the regions weren't necessarily defined by their outer boundaries, but more of the focal points. There are certain places in Nebraska where people go to for medical care that are kind of the regional shopping centers, and we wanted to design a transportation system around those regional centers so that people could get to a medical appointment from Burwell to Grand Island or wherever we needed to go.
Okay, and that's talking about it more big picture perspective. There are so many issues that are obviously going on with this topic. And Barb, if you could tell us maybe something that you didn't know going into this conference, because obviously you're very well versed on this topic. Is there something that came out of this where you're thinking, I just didn't even realize that myself?
Well, I think I didn't realize that there were so many other programs in the state that were really concerned about the same issues that we were concerned about. And so we were looking at some other models in the state, and we also want to look at some other models in other states that might be adapted to an urban area. So I was kind of encouraged that there are some other folks around the state that have some ideas that we can draw from. Okay. In this area, we're concerned initially, I think, about utilizing some of the resources that we have now better. For instance, we have a number of vans and buses around town that are used a few hours a day. We'd really like to look at using those to their best advantage and using them many more hours to serve a lot more people.
And that is a wonderful notion, but some roadblocks obviously associated with that. One of the biggest things that I hear is liability. And so if you are, for instance, wanting to borrow a van from a certain organization because it is sitting for a certain time frame, liability just one of, I'm sure, several roadblocks that you would run into. What types of discussions, Mark, were held around those particular things?
Well, that's one of the, we have a state coalition, and now we have the regional groups. And that's one of the issues that the state coalition is going to have to take on. How can we create systems so that we can share those resources without having to be concerned about liability? What sort of structures would need to be in place to allow that to happen? What sort of organizations do we need to establish in order to allow a couple of different organizations that have buses to work together? We don't necessarily have all those answers to those questions yet, but we're figuring out what the questions are.
And let me ask you just again, from a big picture perspective, how feasible, based on the conversations you've had in the last couple of days, is something like that going to be?
Oh, it's absolutely feasible, and it's been done. It's just a matter of coming together, making sure everybody has a voice at the table as we decide these things, as different county organizations, different stakeholder groups. Everybody has some input into the process to make sure that we come up with a Nebraska system that makes sense for us.
And Lee, not to put you in the hot seat at all, but I will. As a mobility manager, one of the big expectations is going to be that you are kind of the end-all to end-all to helping with coordination efforts, not only locally here, but on a state level as well. So what is it that you have seen with fresh eyes actually coming in? That's a pretty big job for one person. First of all, tell me how many mobility managers we have in the state of Nebraska, and secondly, how you fall into all of that.
Well, the term, again, is new. So people that are hired newly may have it. Some old people may come to the term. So the term is not widely used yet. But again, with federal influence, that's the preferred term that the feds like. But there's behind the scenes problems of business procedures like liability insurance and so on, and that can be very solved. But what I see is the customer-focused, one-stop shop information is really where this will be most visible and helpful to people. Right now, we're talking not only about buses and vans, but individual trips where somebody goes from home to the hospital, or from a job back home. Those one-on-one trips are also considered under this coordination. So there's a lot of information that has to be in one place, so a one-stop shop for information, so that people that are using the system can get help and they can get directed to the most appropriate wheels. We don't know where the most appropriate wheels are, but they're out there. But how do you get the information to the user at the right time on the right day to get them there? And that's the real challenge, is how do we get all that information gathered in one place and then available to the user?
Well, and the fact that we're even talking about this is obviously hopeful for those individuals who are finding the biggest roadblocks out there. And we did identify them earlier, but Mark, I do want you to go over again those folks who are most affected by the roadblocks in the whole coordination collaborative effort. And then Barb, I'll go to you after that, and we'll talk about some glimmers of not false hope, but hope for those individuals. And I want to walk through some scenarios too, because I don't think folks watching are necessarily aware of what people are going through on a day-to-day basis just to try to catch a bus or to try to do whatever they need to do to get to one place or another. So,
well, I work for AARP, so obviously older persons. There are a lot of older people who no longer have a driver's license, but they still need to get to doctor's appointments, grocery stores, social activities. So that's one group of people that we're very interested in and want to make sure that they have access to transportation. A person who has a disability that prevents them from driving, or who have accessibility issues, that they're in a wheelchair. They may need a special type of vehicle to, even in a public transportation system, to be able to get around town. Kids are another group that need to be, their needs need to be addressed in terms of getting to recreational activities or even to school in some cases. I think just people who can't afford, who need to get to work but really can't afford to operate a car. I think a lot of what we're going to be seeing in terms of the development of public transportation is going to be employment related, so that we work with employers. I've been working with, talking to some groups out in the rural parts of the state that they draw from a large area. But they need to have people, some means of people getting to their place of employment.
okay, excellent. So Barb, we've said several there. Seniors is what we started off with. Paint a picture of the typical senior and the scenarios that they face on a day-to-day basis.
Well, what we know is sometimes our seniors can't wait at a bus stop for very long when it's cold. They may need some specialized transportation that picks them up at home. They may not be able to negotiate the steps, although I think Metro Area Transit is taking some steps to remedy that. Handicapped folks really have a very difficult time getting around. And this is a city that is so spread out that it is really difficult for people to get around. And when you start talking about going to work, when you have an individual who lives in northeast or southeast Omaha and they want to go to 160th and Dodge to get to a job and get back, sometimes these people are turning those jobs down. They can't get there, and if they can get there, sometimes they can't get home. So these are difficult problems, and these are problems that are really impacting these folks and their ability to support themselves. So it's a very serious problem.
Yeah, I think the quickest way to educating ourselves on this is just to hear some of those personal stories, because I know one thing, for example, that I didn't think about in all of this is, for those of us who are living in the Omaha area, it's pretty easy to point fingers at MAT, for example, the transit system here. But when you hear individuals who work directly with that organization say things like, well, we had our routes all worked out, and then this huge employer or this huge organization up and moved, and we weren't in on those discussions, the expectation then becomes, well, why can't you just reroute? Almost as though it should just be as simple as that.
It's very fragmented.
It is very fragmented. The other thing that that you hear too, well, we're supposed to be getting more buses. So the assumption then becomes, great, then we'll have more lines and we can have more in the way of frequency and so forth. Now they're probably replacing existing buses.
That
So
is
until,
what they're doing,
until
yes.
you have more people, as you're talking about, more funding and so forth, we really need to take a step back and not be so quick to be critical of these people who really are trying to make a difference. It's just all going to take some time.
Matt is one of our critical partners.
Yes.
We really need them to make this work. And they were at the table at this conference. And we're talking to them about things like expanding their dispatch system, expanding their information systems. Are they able to do that to serve a larger group of vans, buses, what have you? And we're tossing a number of ideas around. So they're going to be with us.
Absolutely, and they need to be. They need to be at the table. Lee, again, we talked about fresh eyes from your perspective. What was it that you, I guess, gleaned going into this conference that you really didn't know existed as a problem for the whole state?
Well, I would look at it more as an opportunity, because if you look at urban areas where this system is a system is coordinated, they have what they call demand response trips that are maybe a third or higher of the number of trips being taken. So those buses need to go where there's a high demand route, but then there's a third or more of these trips that are scheduled to support the bus route, to disperse from the bus route, or one-to-one travel otherwise. So the real opportunity is to coordinate the buses going where the most demand is, but then filling in around it so that that system is supported and is used where it's most appropriate, but then you have other options outside.
With the understanding that things can change and companies do move, and we're going to need to shift right along. But obviously,
But it's technology. It's much easier to move around bits and bytes than it is steel with wheels. So you got to do the technology. You got to have the software. You have to have the data to know where the trips are. So, right now we don't know exactly where all these individual trips are. The origin point and the destination point. We got to track that over time so we know where the demand and the response has to be.
and that is what I would deem as a same page mentality. What, Mark, was your sense coming out of this particular conference? Because this isn't going to work unless we're all willing to work together. What was your sense coming out of that?
In terms of working together, I think this is as positive of a response as I've heard from a broad range of stakeholders ever. I think there's really a willingness to try to sit down and work out these problems. And as Lee said, there's some technologies that are out there that will really help us do this. We had an opportunity to hear from some transportation systems in other states that are using technology, GPS technology, software that helps in bookings so that we can identify where the demand is, where the resource is at any given time, and match things up as efficiently as possible. But in terms of just people working together, we seem to have a convergence here that I've never seen before in terms of public transportation and a willingness to really work together. In some parts of the state, we're even seeing some of the providers say that they're willing to take a step back and let another provider come in and provide services in that area because it would be more efficient. So I see a lot of good things happening at that, just the organizational level. But then on top of that, adding in the technology and those types of things, I think we have some really exciting opportunities ahead of us.
Exciting opportunities, Barb, that are going to cost some money. And
Yes.
as with almost every issue we've addressed, there has to be money to support the ideas. And talk to us a little bit about the funding that is available now and how that is going to play into all of this.
Well, currently we have a Federal Transit Authority grant that is supporting Lee's position. And that was matched by United Way and the Greater Omaha Chamber of Commerce. So we also have them as a partner. So we're finding we have many partners in this endeavor, and we have much interest in it. I think the first thing we're going to look at is how do we use the resources we now have to better advantage. because we have all these vans and buses around town, and maybe Matt has some other ways that they can better serve. So we're going to first look at that. There may be some opportunities maybe with a second round of stimulus funding to help us out with some hardware, perhaps some staffing. We understand that there may be an opportunity to fund another mobility manager that way. We're also looking, after we start to exhaust what we can do with what we've got, looking at other resources, perhaps another FTA grant of a much greater size, maybe some foundations that might have an interest in this, and we'll be looking at the various funding sources to see where we need to go.
And I guess that's my next question as far as funding, Lee. When you're taking a look at the big picture, you know, the first obstacle is finding out what funds are available. Okay, so now we've done that. Barb's talked to us a little bit about that. Then the question becomes, what are the needs across the state? And then we have another small roadblock of, okay, who's going to get this funding or that funding? So A, we need to know about it. B, we need to identify the needs across the state. And C, we need to make sure that we're being fair about all of this and that everybody gets a piece of the pie. How are we going to, it's one thing to try to coordinate buses. This is money that we're talking about to get the buses on the road. So what do you see as the most effective way to try to do all three of those as effectively as we can?
Well, timing, you know, I think this is a good time because people all across our society right now are realizing we can't just do more of the same, spending more money doing the same thing. So coordination is really putting the money to its best use today and getting ready to put it to its best use tomorrow. So that the funding, there's a lot of money being spent right now. So we have to get more trips and more service out of the same amount of money. And that means we've got to do some things differently. But it's not to get more money for X new service. It's to rearrange what we're doing so that the money can flow and it can come in, but people have to see the benefit from collaboration, the benefit from coordination, the benefit from doing things together. And you know, all through our society right now, we're looking at that. So this is a good time.
Okay, excellent. Now, we've talked a little bit about the dollars. Now let's do kind of a mini needs assessment, if we could. If someone, Mark, were to ask you today, based on the conference, of course, but just your vast knowledge in this area in general, what would you identify as the three top priorities? If we were to give the ball to you and say, give us the three top priorities in the big city, and Barb, I'm going to put you on the spot after Mark's done and ask you to tell us about the three priorities in rural areas. If we were given that opportunity to say, here's the money, what would be the three areas, Mark?
Well, I'm going to give the urban to Barb, and I'll take the rural.
Okay, you'll take, that's fine.
So
Terrific.
What we see in the rural areas is a lot of small public transportation systems operating often at a county level, and in a really sparsely populated area. So I think the first thing is the thing that we're doing right now is getting all of those systems within a region to start talking together, start working together. This issue came up about a year ago. I had a conversation with somebody from the State Unit on Aging who had just done a round of focus groups across the state and found that transportation was the thing that came up at the top of the list of needs. So we sat down and started talking about this, and we looked at what resources are out there in terms of buses. There are a lot of buses across the state, but they're not necessarily, we don't necessarily have the degree of coordination. It wasn't like we needed additional funds for buses. We needed to take a look at how we could get those buses working together a little bit more efficiently. So that's the first thing, is just that communication between the different systems that are out there. I think what we will find once we get past that step is that we have the buses, we may need the help with operating costs. We may have a part-time driver in a county so you can get someplace between 10 and 2, but that's about it. So that we need to expand the hours for that. beyond that, I think looking at how we can use technology. What are the technology advances that we can apply to this system to make sure that we get people where they need to go?
Excellent. Okay, Barb,
Identifying priorities
if you could.
in the urban area. Well, from my perspective, I think one of the first things we've got to do is identify many of these vans and buses around town and begin to get some indication that organizations see the benefit of cooperating with this. And then from there, trying to determine some kind of a system to make that workable. Perhaps the third thing is trying to overcome whatever barriers we have or work out whatever difficulties such as insurance. And we'll be looking to the state coalition. I've told Mark, I want you to work on this. I want you to work on public policy. I want you to work on those statewide issues with this statewide coalition. This is why we need you. And so that you can enable us all over the state to make this happen. But I wanted to make a point that I don't think came out in our discussion. We have buses, and I'll just give you an example of how this would work. From one college, for instance, they want to get their students from one campus to another. So they'll have shuttles and transport the students. But if there's somebody standing on the street corner that needs to go to the same destination, they're not going to pick them up. And that's part of what we're talking about when we talk about coordination, that we can stop this really wasteful kinds of practices. And that's what we talk about when we talk about integration.
Excellent. And Mark, we just have a few seconds left. Speak specifically to those folks out there who are running into the roadblocks. In maybe 15 seconds, what thoughts would you give them?
Well, I think we do have, there are some resources out there currently. I think we have a website, the Nebraska Public Transit Association website, that has a list of resources. Try those, see what we can do to try to make public transportation work for you. If it doesn't work, know that there's somebody working on it to try to fix it.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. And we do have websites that we want to put up for folks. We have 3 of those, and the first one is United Way of the Midlands, www.uwmidlands.org, www.mapacog.org, and www.neatp.org. Well, speaking on behalf of everybody watching, we're glad to have you in the driver's seat of all of this. Thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.
Consider This is an issues and information program produced by UNO Television. More information and program archives can be found at unotv.unomaha.edu. If you'd like to share your comments about this show, call UNO TV at 402-554-2516 during regular business hours.
The 12th season of Consider This is brought to you in part by From the Top, a national program showcasing the musical talents of young people. From the Top can be heard on KVNO Classical 90.7 each Saturday at 6 p.m.